How are you guys? Welcome back to Wargaming China. Now, you know what this channel is about. I'm a wargamer. I've got a love for making models and toys and painting toy soldiers, and I use it to platform my understandings of the War of Resistance against Japanese aggression in China from 1931 to 1945. Now, as you can see before you, we're back to some Chinese airplanes, and we've got the HS-111, the Dawamantine 510, the I-15, the I-16, the P-26, and the Gloucester Gladiator. And all of those I've done brief introductions to, and nothing more than brief introductions to, because there are far more qualified people to talk about aircraft than me. However, I recently have built another kit, and it is the AML Mohawk 75Q by AML Models. Not a very nice kit to build, but not many people do a Rebel do one. Not many other people do a P36 in 1/72nd scale. Okay, so let's get started. Now, the Curtiss P36 was the Curtiss P36 in American service. For export, it was given the name Hawk 75. Now, before I really get into it, I've got to say that I want to thank the following authors and sites: Martin Bowman, Bill Gunston, Robert Jackson, William Green, Gordon Swanborough, and Rex's Hangar, as well as the Aviation of Japan. So all of these sources helped me do this today. Now, Curtiss began work on the Model 75 in November 1934, and it was accepted for trials with the United States Army Air Force in 1935, and then it entered American service in April 1938. It was its first US aircraft in service with an enclosed cockpit and retractable landing gear. The P-36A was the first plane in US service and the P-36A was the first plane to engage Japanese planes in combat over the skies of Hawaii on the 7th of December 1941. During the second wave, 4 Curtiss P-36s managed to get airborne, and they shot down 2 Japanese bombers. So even from day one from America, this plane was doing its part. Now, the P-36 was an export success for Curtiss, but aviation enthusiasts still argue about how effective a design it was. The P-36 was exported to, before the war, the P-36 was exported to Thailand, Argentina, France, and China. The French had ordered the Hawk 75A1 with retractable landing gear, and by the end of the battle for France, the H-75s in French service had shot down 239 Axis aircraft for the loss of 29 H-75s. Although on paper the Me-109 outclassed the H-75, the Hawk could turn inside the 109, was more agile, and could take more punishment than the Me-109. Remember, in the Battle of France, neither aircraft would have been fitted with self-sealing tanks. The French Hawk would go on to serve under the Vichy government, seeing combat during Operation Torch in 1942 against Grumman Wildcat fighters. They were outclassed against the Wildcats, and by the end of the day they'd suffered 15 losses. However, they had shot down 7 Wildcats, so you know. French Hawks would also see combat during the Franco-Thai War from October 1941 to January 1942 And in this war, Thais would field their Thailand, which had bought 25 Hawk Ns, would field their Hawks, and they would do good work for the Thais. The Thais won that war. Now, after the fall of France, the French had bought 700 Hawks, but they only managed to put together about 200, and that's how many they had in service. The rest was still in crates. Now, after the armistice, the Germans decided to send 44 Hawks or P-36s to serve with the Finns, and some people say that 13 of the Hawks the Finns received were from the Norwegian, were from Norway, and the rest were from French stocks. Now, Finland received 44 Hawks, and they were popular. And they were going to claim 190 Soviet planes for the loss of 15 Hawks. So again, a very good performance by the P-36 Hawk. So we're looking at the Hawk, and we can see that by the end of World War II, almost every nation, or the air force of every nation, had it in service, or it was in service with them. New Zealand had them in service. South Africa, India, Argentina, Great Britain, China, Norway, Finland, France, Iran, Dutch East Indies, Peru, Portugal, and Thailand were all bought the P-36. So although it wasn't a success, it wasn't much of a success as far as Curtiss was concerned with selling it to the American Air Force, but it certainly was a success in the export market. Now, before I get started on Hawks procured by China, I have to say that it's quite a long story, and there's a lot of contradictions and convolutions, so I want to try and keep it as simple as possible. Now, the records say that China bought 112 Hawk 75Ms in 1937 and had received them all by late 38. That order was attained after Curtiss sent 2 Hawks as demonstrator models to China, and they were either known as the Hawk Specials or the China Demonstrator. Now, apparently these would be the pattern aircraft for the forthcoming Hawk M, or that's what some say. And if you look at them, they look very similar. Now, the Hawk M was basically the same as a Hawk, but it had fixed landing carriage, and it had an engine, a Cyclone engine that didn't produce as much horsepower, so it wasn't as fast, and it couldn't climb as fast. The M model. Now, on its arrival in China, it was immediately purchased by Madame Chiang Kai-shek, and she gave it to Claire Chennault. Now, Chennault flew this aircraft in combat over Nanking and Hankow and a few other places, mainly in the reconnaissance role, where, stripped of guns, it was a very fast plane. He would put the lessons he learnt piloting in a Hawk against the Japanese into a practical fighter doctrine that he would teach the pilots of the American Volunteer Group later in the war. Now, let's get back to the horse. 30 Hawk, because they bought the 2 demonstrators that received, and then another 30 were bought. Now, these arrived by August 1938 at a cost of $31,000 each, and they would equip the 16th, 18th, and 25th Pursuit Squadrons. Now, the 25th was the first to fly the 75M, the Hawk 75M, into combat over Hanyang, when 3 H-75s and 7 I-16s engaged Jap bombers. Now, during that mission, all 3 Hawks were shot down by the Japanese, so it wasn't off to a very good start. Now, as far as the order for China goes, all the books will tell you China ordered 112 Hawks and they were delivered. Well, and they'll tell you that China bought the Hawk M. Now, China did buy the Hawk M, but Curtis itself had its only production records for actually manufacturing 30 Hawk M's, or 32 Hawk M's, if you include the tester models. Now, the others were shipped to China, but as I've said before on this show, what gets sent to China, what arrives in China, and what gets used in China, sent to the front, is three different things. Now, if we look at some sources, we will see that China received 30 Hawks that were assembled in very rudimentary conditions, but were assembled successfully and did serve with 3 squadrons. Now, these Hawks did suffer maintenance problems because there was a general lack of maintenance knowledge within China until the arrival of the AVG and the Soviet Volunteer Group before them. And if you remember, planes aren't like cars. I mean, even today's modern air forces, if you train on one plane, it doesn't mean you can do a bloody thing to another plane. Planes are very complex pieces of equipment. We should never forget that. Now, let's go back to the other 80 odd. The other 80 planes that would have been shipped to China. Now, China would find in service would struggle to make the rest of the planes. So a company was set up, the CAMCO, Chinese Aircraft Manufacturing Company, and it was supposed to operate in China, around Chongqing, Kunming or Chongqing, the sources vary. But other sources say that the CAMCO couldn't do the job, so all the planes didn't even get to China. They were sent to India for assemblage there. And it appears from photos that the model that they produced was the Q, with retractable landing gear, and some would have had the Cyclone engine in, and some would have had the Pratt & Whitney engine in. It depends on your source. Now, let's have a quick look at the Hawk. This is the Type C that I'm going to talk about. Pratt & Whitney 1200 horsepower engine. The Cyclone engine only produced 800 horsepower. Its maximum speed was 311 miles per hour at 15,000 feet. It had a 37,000 feet ceiling and a range of 820 miles, which is a huge step up from the P-26. Its armament was 150 cal and 330 cals machine guns. Now, in Chinese service, the records will tell you that some of the Chinese M's, the Hawk 75 M's, were fitted with 23mm Madsen cannons for service breaking up bomber formations. And one pilot, Weigel, even claimed 3 kills with this plane. However, for every contradiction, for every claim there's another contradiction by a French pilot that says, no, their 75s never even entered combat. And as we say, we can kind of know something about the first 32 Hawk M sent to China with some degree of certainty. But as for the other 80, what they were, where they served, how many, all we have is a lot of contradictory tales and essays and whatever. And obviously I haven't gone to the original sources, I've just gone to the sources in my books. And Aviation China was a great help with this. Aviation China seemed to be the only one that would lay out, kind of like what I do, what could have been and what one party says and what the other party says. Now, as I get back to Weigel shooting down 3 Japanese bombers with fixed undercarriage 75M, there's no photographic record of a 75M, and most often think, well, because it was from memory, maybe it was wrong. The Japanese that day had talked about damaged bombers, but none shot down. But I very rarely look at Japanese records of this war. I look at the Western records, I look at Taiwanese records, and look at Chinese records, and I look at Western interpretations. The only time I ever really look at the Japanese is for OBs. Now, So let's get back to the Hawk. Listen, I know it's getting boring, but this is the only one I've got. I've done 7 aircraft now. I do have a P40, but I probably will never do a video on the P40 because there are just so many experts who know far more than me. But the Hawk 75 is a plane with a lot of grey area. So were there ever 80 planes built in China or built in India and sent to China? We don't know. But what we do know is that the Q-type does appear in photographs and as artists' impressions, and they seem to have been serving in Kunming in around about 1940. Well, in 1940 they were serving in Kunming. Now I am thinking about putting two Madsen autocannons underneath, but I will look for a better picture before I build that. And as I said, because there's so many contradictions in this and not many pictures, I don't know if I'll ever get it done. But I mean, a twin autocannons underneath. The autocannons were in a gondola under each wing, one under each wing. And of course, as a wargamer, I would love to see what they would do against Jap armor or infantry formations on the wargaming table. So maybe they will appear. That wouldn't be historically correct. But then again, the combat story of the Hawk 75 in China is contradictory, convoluted, and mainly it's a tale of a very hard aircraft to maintain, and a struggle getting new pilots familiar with the plane without them killing themselves in the first landing by the undercarriages folding up. So this plane had a lot of mechanical mishaps during its service life, and a lot were written off because of accidents, which is again another grey area of the Hawk 75 in Chinese use. But if you like that, you should subscribe, because I never know when I'm going to do a video. As I said, the model is an AML Hawk 75, and it wasn't a very nice kit to build. It was a lot of the parts were resin. I've got to do a few touch-ups of the paint work before this is finished, but it was just something for me to do today quickly, and I hope you enjoyed that. So press like and subscribe. Thank you. See ya.